Assalamu alaikum. First, I would like to thank the organizers, the conference committee, and Georgetown University, 1789, a very good year. In my presentation today, I will introduce you to the project of the Aga Khan University, World Monument Fund, and Tanzanian Antiquities in Kuwa, a Swahili site that flourished during the modern period. For many scholars, the modern world starts with the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean, 1498. Let's say the 16th century. This definition is, of course, very practical for Europeans as it coincides with the Renaissance in Europe, and for us, the specialists of medieval and modern Islam, with the Ottoman Empire. Needless to say that Portuguese were extremely violent, and they destroyed many towns and ports all along the Indian Ocean coast. However, violence in the Indian Ocean existed before the 16th century in East Africa, and the Swahili world was not a peaceful and ideal land where Africans lived in peace and harmony until the arrivals of the Europeans. But it's true that maritime trade was destabilized during the 16th century, and the main actors of the trade had to adapt themselves to these newcomers. Many of the Muslim networks were, if not broken, destabilized. The non-Muslim communities took advantage of these changes, such as the one in India. It's also true that many Swahili sites ceased to exist after the late 15th century or early 16th century, showing an incredible vulnerability to the maritime trade and international market changes. This is, to me, a serious proof that the Swahili were maritime in nature. "20 years ago, finishing my PhD, I stupidly repeated what many archaeologists and historians wrote before me, to say that the arrival of the Portuguese created an economic recession in the Indian Ocean trades during the 16th century. I was working on a Swahili medieval site, Gedi, in Kenya, and this so-called model was extremely practical for me to explain the decline of the city." This is some survey that we did. As you can see here, you have an horizontal stratigraphy of the city of Gedi, with a first site from the 11th century to 14th century, then the expansion of the town with a town wall during the 15th century, and then a recession of the town, a decline of the city during the 16th century, that I, of course, connected to the Portuguese. Most of the archaeologists work on early Swahili or proto-Swahili sites, 6th to 10th century, or classic Swahili sites, 11th, 15th century. Mea culpa, I was one of them. I was working always on this kind of site. Songobnara, for example, in the Bay of Kilwa, is a perfect example of a mid-sized Swahili site from the 15th century. Songobnara here. Well, you can see it's a Swahili site with a lot of stone house, a so-called palace, several mosques protected by a stone wall. Up to now, no large-scale excavations were conducted on modern Swahili sites, and Kuwa was a perfect candidate to study a site contemporaneous to the Portuguese expansion in the Indian Ocean, so 16th, 17th century. Here you have a map location of Mafia in between Zanzibar and Kilwa, and a map of Mafia and also of Juani Island with the location of Kuwa. Kuwa is located on a small island of Juani to the southwest of Mafia Island at the mouth of the Rufiji River in Tanzania. Kuwa is one of the largest Swahili sites in East Africa and probably the less studied. The site was never properly excavated. Only few houses and mosques were recorded and published by Galarc, and some surveys were carried in 2010 for a PhD fieldwork by Christie's. Now, I will describe our preliminary results and our first mission in Kuwa from July to August 2018. But I would like to begin in 2017, when the site of Kuwa was included in the World Monument Watch List because the surviving structures could collapse at any time, while the site as a whole was threatened by continued effect of climate change, sea erosion, and destruction by gold diggers looking for Swahili treasure. Unmanaged tourism from nearby resorts and potential commercial development put centuries of heritage at risk. In 2017, the World Monument Fund was awarded a grant from the Ambassador Fund for Cultural Preservation to undertake a pilot preservation and community engagement project at the Kuwa ruins. In 2017 also, the Aga Khan University Research Council awarded us a grant to start archaeological excavations on the site of Kuwa. One important aspect of our project were the two field schools, archaeology and conservation, and the Aga Khan University in East Africa, of course, support research, education, and local development. The preservation project of the ancient Swahili ruins of Kuwa had two main objectives. First, to engage the community living on the island of Juani in preservation and future management of the site, and thereby develop a custodianship model that is more equitable and sustainable. And second, to carry out physical conservation at the site based on international best practice in order to preserve it for future generations. The preservation side of the project has two main components. First, the documentation of the site and standing ruins to identify their extent, location, and to create tools to improve management. And the second, physical preservation of the most threatened structures at the site. Juani Island is a remote island, even from Mafia Island, accessible only by small boat, with no source of potable water or electricity. The logistics were very challenging with the construction of facilities for the conservation work and also the project life base, as we did in Songomnara a few years ago. The project was implemented by the Tanzanian Antiquities, who is in charge of all the historic monuments in Tanzania, in partnership with the Marine Park, using a core team of skilled craft people, workers, and craftsmen trained from our precedent project in Kilwa. Conservation works included 13 structures, we say structures, but in fact, translation is houses, including including also 6 mosques, with adjacent tombs, 6 houses, 1 cemetery, and 1 cemetery. The clearance of the site of invading vegetation revealed many structures, including the discovery of a new mosque. So now let's move on the Zamani Heritage Documentation Research Group from the University of Cape Town, who documented the site of Kuwa for the Aga Khan University and the World Monument Fund. The equipment used comprised a terrestrial laser scanner for the creation of 3D computer models and DSLR cameras for texturing. A drone was deployed for the creation of an ortho image for the entire site, and GPS instrument was employed to determine the position of control points required to accurately georeference the scanner structures and the orthophoto. Here you can see the GPS. It's a modern way to take points. Better than the total station. Here you can see the drone over the Great Mosque. Vertical and horizontal sections through all 3D models were generated to create ground and building plans. Separate drone flights following a traditional photogrammetric grid flight plan were carried out. Here you can see the result of the survey. You have the plan of the site of Kuwa. In red, you have the location of all the mosques. And here in the middle, the so-called palace. In fact, it's the biggest house in the middle. Yes. 6 test pits were dug to reveal different phases of occupation on the site from the 12th to the 17th century. So as you have seen on the map, the first settlement was probably to the north of the site, as you can see in brown, and the 6 mosques were identified from the north to the south. Although evidence of an early occupation were quite modest, at least one occupation layer provided specific fragment of hatchet graffiato pottery from the 11th and the 12th century. One structure, a pit latrine, archaeologists like pit latrine, was associated to this early period in the house 7. Nevertheless, other pieces of ancient graffiato were found during our survey all over the site, attesting the foundation of the site at least from the 11th, 12th century. The settlement started to be more significant from the 15th century onward, with several subdivisions were noticed in the different construction phase of the house 7. On the site, however, we didn't find any artifact belonging to this break period between the 12th to the 15th century. But this absence of archaeological material might be due to some erosion processes. Here it's the site from the 16th, 17th century. Layers from the 15th century phases were observed in the house 5 with some pieces of celadon ware in some layers. Here you can see the mihrab of probably the first great mosque, the mosque of the 15th century, with some blue and white porcelain inserted in the mihrab. We had also Persian silhouette ware from the 15th century also. So the main and principal occupation phase in Kuwa occurred during the 16th, 17th century in many areas of the site. It was during this period, under the Portuguese era, that the town knew its biggest extension, with the creation of various compounds such as the house 5 and 7 in the area of mosque number 2. In fact, mosque number 2 is the great mosque of the 17th and 16th century. Here you can see the 3D model. It's not a 3D model, I mean, it's a 3D, it's accurate. It's based on the point that we took of the great mosque. Here you can see the mosque with the texture, so the photos that we added on the walls. Classic Swahili mosque with 2 rows of pillars on both sides of the mihrab. Here you can see the mihrab, and next to it, to the right, you have the minbar. It's also something who attests that it was a great mosque. And then you have the plan of the mosque to the left. In addition to this urbanization process, inhabitants built more small mosques, as you have seen previously. During our surveys, we identified a new large mosque built very closely to the shore. Unfortunately, due to marine erosion, the Qibla wall collapsed onto the beach. You can see one wall here. We also recorded many graveyards and cemeteries within the city, most of the time connected to a mosque, with some important funerary compound with pillar tombs for the notable. Here you can see a pillar tomb in Kuwa. Our excavations focus mainly on the stone house prior to the conservation project. Kuwa stone house were occupied by the elite of the site, so-called Ungwana, or the noble families, most of the time merchant. Kuwa stone houses are slightly different from those from the 15th century observed in Gedi and Songomnara. The technique, size, organization of the room are almost the same as the one of the medieval period. For example, with small niches in the reception room, like the one that you can see here. The construction techniques are the same, with fossil coral stone, what we call also limestone, set in thick mortar. But in the 17th century, the buildings were built with more rough masonry and thicker wall than their 15th century counterpart, and almost no use of fresh coral stone to do the carving of the doors and the niches. The differences are the fact that the houses in Kuwa are standing alone. They are not compacted like the ones that you saw in Gedi or Songomnara. And they are not connected to each other, showing more empty spaces between the compounds in Kuwa. Then the houses are separated by 2 parts, almost symmetrical, as you